Sam Sulek is talking about how, you should have an arm day. A lot of people are saying that you shouldn't. He's pointing out that his arms are a weak point on his physique because he's got gigantic, massive hunks of meat for shoulders.
Oh, all right. Right. Nearly 20 and a half. Holy shit. There has been some blaspheming going on as of late, and frankly, I can't stand for it. Right? I'm talking there has been slander on people who hit full arm days. Right? I'm talking tries, buys, the works. And, it's getting dogged on. And I can't sit on the sidelines and just take it.
And he's dedicating himself to trying to bring that weakness up. Primary methodology being having a dedicated arm day. And the pipes are coming in at 20.5 inches pumped, which is a gigantic set of pipe daddies, girth monsters, upper decker meat, hog-a-ronies. Holy smokes, Sammy Sue.
This is my rebuttal. If you've never done dedicated arm days, at least on a reasonably consistent basis, and you're a push-pull legs purist, I would at least recommend you try it. Right, that's my point there. And let's say, you actually have done arm days before. It just doesn't click with you for whatever reason. Maybe you think it's a little boring. You're hitting muscle groups that are just too small. You want some bigger lifts when you come into the gym. So just sitting doing curls and push downs, it's not your style. That's different, right? But to just blatantly label them as, I don't know what the take is. So I'm asking genuinely, like, if you're an arm day hater, what's their argument against it? What are these guys really saying? Where it's like, you're only getting buys and tries?
But others, like Dr. Mike, are telling you arm day is dead. There's a lot of debate, back and forth. And, of course, I'm biased because I only do arms. But I'm going to give you a more objective take. And we're going to acknowledge what are the reasons against having an arm day, what are the reasons for. And then you can try to decide what makes the most sense for you, okay? So, some of the reasons against having an arm day that actually make a lot of sense. Number one, if you are not trying to prioritize arm growth, I would argue don't have an arm day in a lot of instances. If you just are going for balanced general muscle growth and you don't specifically want bigger arms in proportion to your other muscles, then it could be counterproductive to dedicate a whole day just to growing these small muscles and isolating them because they're going to receive a substantial amount of stimulus from your other upper body days. When you do pressing movements, the triceps are significantly involved. Chest, shoulder press. When you do pulling movements, seated rows, lat pull downs, your biceps are significantly involved. And comparatively, they're smaller muscles. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to go in there and just hit your arms if you want balanced overall growth. So any kind of split, push-pull legs, upper, lower, this wacky split that Mike suggested in this previous Arm Days Dead video that I, pushed back on, and the frickin' Mike's got some diehard people that just love him, and me even suggesting people hate me. Holy shit, man. Okay. In all fairness, if you aren't specifically trying to prioritize arms, then that is one good reason to not have an arm day. But if you do identify that you want to emphasize your arms and prioritize their growth, then I think you definitely should have an arm day. Some of the arguments against having an arm day are also that your biceps and triceps heal at different rates. So therefore, the amount of time it takes to recover from an arm day, it's not going to be efficient because let's say your triceps take 3 days to recover and your biceps take 2 days to recover. So either you're going to hit them again in 2 days, but then your triceps will be trained not fully recovered, and you're going to hit them again in 3 days, but then your biceps had an extra unnecessary day of rest, and you're not going to make as much progress. This assumption I don't think is accurate, and you can judge for yourself. If you consistently notice that your biceps heal more quickly or more slowly than your triceps and there is an asymmetry there, then fair enough. And maybe there is a more efficient way to train them so that you're accounting for that difference in recovery time. But most people that I've worked with do not experience that. I haven't experienced it myself, and I've never seen scientific evidence behind that. So a lot of times when science-based characters like Dr. Mike make claims, some of it is based on science, but some of it is just completely opinion. And there's no science that I've seen documenting different rates of recovery between your biceps and triceps. I'm willing to change that perspective if that information is provided. Another aspect that doesn't to me make a ton of sense when you're arguing that if you're going to train your arms specifically, those muscles, it makes more sense to train your biceps with your back because they both have a similar function. There's overlap there. When you're doing your rows, your biceps are activated. So therefore, on that same day, I should also isolate my biceps. Similarly with pressing movements, when I'm doing my push day, chest pressing, shoulder pressing, whatever, my triceps are being activated. Therefore, I should pair that tricep work with that muscle rather than on a separate day going and isolating those triceps and biceps. And I actually mostly disagree with this point because, in my opinion, the primary thing that is going to lead to more muscle growth in any one muscle group is your ability to progress the weight and reps over time. And although your biceps work with your back when you're doing back movements, the fatigue that the biceps incur from that back work is going to hinder or limit your ability to progress your weight with your bicep work. That's assuming you do the back first and then you finish with biceps, which is what most people do. I think that you're accumulating fatigue on your biceps through the back work that you do. And then by the time you get to biceps, you're not going to be able to do as much weight for as many reps as you would if you were fresh and you had started the workout with biceps or you worked out biceps on their own day. Why that's important is because I believe, in my experience, that being fresh in those first few sets where you challenge yourself, pushing to the max to get additional reps and bump the weight up over time is what is the most potent stimulator of additional muscle growth. And so by not having your biceps and triceps trained when they're fresh, I think you are not prioritizing growth of those muscles. So if you want to have bigger arms specifically, I think it's not substantial enough to pair them with these other muscles, even though there's some overlap that these back muscles get worked while we work the biceps, the triceps get worked while we work the push muscles. That's a theoretical thought of like, okay, so therefore it makes more sense to work them with that muscle. But that just means that you're just identifying an anatomical overlap where both muscle groups get targeted from the same movements. Does that therefore mean that it makes more sense to train them together when you're trying to prioritize muscle growth, muscle growth in that group of muscles? I don't think so. I think the benefits of doing that are not as significant as the costs because you're not fresh and you're going to be harder to progress the weight over time. You're not going to make as much muscle growth in those muscles. And so, I think that it's again and like finding these tiny little details that don't actually correlate with producing more growth, but do have some basis of truth, and then blowing them up into something more substantial than they actually are so that you can make an alternative prescription that's novel and new. And there's always going to be the next iteration and regurgitation of the lifting knowledge to produce some novel new approach if you want that to be the case. But that doesn't mean that it's actually true or highly correlated with what you need to do to get more muscle growth. And so I think a lot of these reasons against having an arm day, particularly if you specifically want bigger arms, make less sense in my experience. And I think it's for you to determine for yourself. If you do find that, I think you should try both, and I think a lot of people who are quick to dismiss arm day have never had a dedicated arm day for a significant period of time. And so it's easy to just, you haven't experienced the counterfactual. You don't know what the opposite universe is. And you may be like, Matt, you only train arms, but I trained normally for like 4 or 5 years in the beginning. And this is what I noticed. And so if you like a couple ideas of different splits that actually make more sense in terms of prioritizing your arm growth, but not having an arm day, to me would be pairing your back with your triceps and your chest with your biceps. That way, they're opposing muscle groups. So when you're hitting your back movements, your triceps are resting. When you're hitting your triceps movement, your back is resting. Why is that important? Again, if your goal is to gain muscle, in my opinion and experience, the most potent thing is to be able to push more weight for more reps over time. Therefore, when I hit my back, although I'm incurring some systemic fatigue on my whole body, there is not an accumulation of muscle fatigue on the triceps. That would be there if you were pairing your pressing movements with your tricep day. So the tricep is allowed to rest and be more recovered and produce a higher output of force in any given set. You're going to push more weight for more reps than you would if you were pairing it with those overlapping anatomical muscles in terms of the function in your chest and shoulders. There's no overlap between triceps and back, which I think is more of an advantage, so that your back training doesn't suffer from fatiguing your biceps. Your tricep training doesn't suffer from fatiguing your triceps. Uh, yeah. Is that what I was saying? your your back training doesn't suffer from fatigued biceps, and your tricep training doesn't suffer from fatigued chest muscles, chest and shoulder from the pressing movements. Similarly with the chest bicep split, you go do your set of dumbbell bench, the biceps they're not getting worked. So then when you go to do your first set of curls, they're basically fresh. And if you go back and forth, chest and biceps, you're not incurring additional fatigue on that muscle, so that at the end of that workout, you move the weight for more reps than you would have if you paired it with back. So you're kind of getting a lot of the benefit, in my opinion, of having an arm day without having an arm day. But you're not pairing you're not lining up this anatomical symmetry, which to me is just like, I don't know why you think that means that training your biceps with your back makes more sense. I think it makes less sense, in my opinion. So as for you, you should try multiple different kinds of splits. Whether you're trying to prioritize arm growth or you just want balanced growth, you should try different splits. And that wacky split that Dr. Mike suggested at the end, I'm like, you could try it. Like it makes little to no sense. The arguments at hand don't make much sense if you're trying to prioritize arm growth. I think it's counterproductive. But as a split in general, it could be productive. Yeah, there's no real evidence that I've seen that bis and tris heal at different rates. And I think it makes less logical sense to train your biceps with your back and your triceps with your chest, because you're incurring more fatigue and you're not going to be able to progress the weight as quickly as you could if you didn't. And I think another concept to think about is junk volume. So when you look at your split, I think it matters at what point in any workout you do the sets for any given muscle. Disproportionately at the beginning of the workout, you're going to get more out of whatever muscle group you target in the beginning because you're fresh. And I've seen a lot of people saying that, no, it's fine, I can hit my legs and then I train biceps after. And I think a piece of nuance that I guess I would be biased with is that I'm assuming you're training with really high intensity. And you cannot tell me that you're training with extremely high intensity on a leg day and you have a good amount of energy to hit your biceps. If you say that, then you're not training very hard, which is okay. But I think 95% of people in the gym that I've ever seen don't train with high intensity. It's 1 out of 20 people that's pushing themselves to the max that's really getting after it. So given that, I'm living in this biased reality where for me everything is, if you want growth, you got to max it out. I've tried not doing that. And although there is a conversation of, stimulus to recovery, Like how much stress do I want to put on the muscle and how do I balance that with the appropriate amount of recovery? I don't want to overdo the stimulus. Like that is a real conversation. I'm not dismissing that. But through my own experimentation, I've consistently noticed higher intensities to always produce more muscle growth. And, maybe you can overdo that if you do too much volume, which I've done. I've experienced that. And then your body does start to not break down, but it starts to have a difficult time actually recovering from the work you're doing. That is a real thing. But generally speaking, if you're not pushing with maximum intensity, especially after you've been at it for a couple of years consistently, I just don't see how you're going to get a ton of muscle growth. If your goal is performance or strength, there's a different argument to be made there. Maybe you don't actually need to train to failure. But if it's for muscle growth, I think it's a necessity to achieve higher and higher levels of muscular development. So that's would be my bias. And I guess a lot of people that are, consuming that content or people that are following Dr. Mike or Jeff Nipper or science-based lifting, it's not really drilled into you to train to failure. So if you're not training to failure, then yeah, maybe you can do 8 sets of legs and then have, semi decent productive bicep sets because you're not really that fatigued from your legs because you didn't really push them that hard. But anyone who's getting after it, you can't tell me that a murderous, growth stimulating aggressive leg session, I feel like I'm a good leg day for me. Nausea is a requirement. And not that I'm like, oh, I need to feel pain. But I've done leg days where I don't do that, and I just they're not really growing. They're not even that sore. It's just a one proxy where it's like I am nauseous, I am dizzy, I feel a little bit lightheaded because the legs are the biggest muscle, and I'm pulling all of the blood in my freaking body into the legs because I'm pushing them to the maximum to try to get some growth. There's no way. There's no way I would be able to get as productive of a bicep workout. If I consistently had in my split legs before biceps, I guarantee my biceps would lag behind. So if you're in the more beginner phase and you're not, maxing out all your sets, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you can do biceps with legs, maybe you can do triceps after chest, and it's not going to limit your ability to progress the weight as much because you're not pushing that hard and incurring as much fatigue. And to each his own, again, you could try different styles of training. If you want to do a not to failure training approach for an extended period of time, try it. I wouldn't be here to tell you that it couldn't be productive, but I think there's a reason that like all the top physiques, people that they're all intensity, 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 intensity. And the more, you go along your journey, the more important it becomes to really hone in on that intensity. That doesn't mean that, you always have to redline yourself and that, the recovery to, stimulus to recovery ratio or whatever isn't a real thing. It is, but I think yeah, I don't know. To me, there's just a mountain of example and evidence in favor of really high intensity producing substantially better results. But to each his own. Um, yeah, and I think that it really comes down to what your goal is in the gym. And it's totally fair to say that arm day doesn't make sense if you just want balanced general growth. I think it actually probably makes more sense to not have an arm day if you're not trying to prioritize arms. I think you could still have an arm day, but yeah, then you're dedicating a significant amount of time, energy, and resources to isolating some pretty small muscles. Um, and if that's not a priority to grow them, then yeah. And another aspect would be if you don't make a ton of time for the gym, so you don't have a ton of time, you don't make a ton of time, then and you're only in there 3 days a week, yeah, don't do an arm day. You know, do two upper days and one lower day. Or do a push pull legs, split it up 3 days, whatever. If I could train my whole body properly, I would probably still have an arm day. I would do one of two things. I would do a push pull day where I superset or alternating pushing and pulling movements with the same structure that I train arms with, and then maybe the first day I would do arms, and then the next day I would do the push pull, and then I would do legs, and that would be my split, and then I'd probably repeat again arms, push pull, legs. And that'd be 6 days, and then maybe the seventh day is a rest day, or maybe you just keep going and going and going depending on how your body responds. That'd be one option. The other option would be to do biceps and chest together and then the next day do triceps and back together, and then the next day do legs. And then either take a rest day after or just jump straight into doing it again, work a rest day in here or there. If you're brand new, maybe you just do you spread those 3 days out throughout the whole week. So Monday you do chest biceps, Wednesday you do back triceps, Friday you do legs, Saturday, Sunday you take off. If you're getting right into the gym, you don't need to necessarily be in there 6 days a week. You could just do 3 and you'll see some good progress. I think that's a good place to end it. You guys comment, let me know what you think about the whole thing. And we'll go from there. Yeah. If you want to get gigantic pipes, ARM program, it's a good resource, could help you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Peace.